So welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you guys are doing well. Yes, yes. So we have some visitors today. I'll let them do their own introductions in a moment. But I know you remember this, but this is the week in which we're going to start looking, for next class in particular, about readings on the intersection of topics like environmentalism and populism, right? And environmental policy and populism. And we were lucky, right, to be able to get two activists from the Sunrise Movement to come and speak with us in class. They're going to start with a presentation that's going to take about half the time, maybe 40 minutes, give or take, but then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A afterward. They're going to have lunch at Harris Refectory, so if some of you want to join them and continue a conversation about this or just join for fun, right? You're more than welcome to, right? If you can't, it's not a mandatory task, right? It's more of a bonus activity if so you'd like. Okay, I don't want to take too much time from the presentation because we have a tight schedule. Everybody's here, everybody's ready. I'll give it to you.
All right, do you want to start?
Okay. Hi guys, my name is Jenny. I'm involved with Sunrise RI, and I've been working with Sunrise since January.
I'm Mitch. I've been with Sunrise for a little bit over a year now. I'm one of the communications directors for Sunrise Connecticut. So yeah, and I'm a sophomore at Eastern Connecticut State University.
So I'm just going to jump in and give you guys like a brief background about Sunrise, although you guys watch the New York Times videos, so I'm sure you're pretty well aware of our grounding. But basically Sunrise started with like a small group of 12 young people who were like friends and worked together on like movements like for the pipeline action and divestment actions, but they felt like those movements weren't enough to like really touch upon like how big of like an issue this is, how climate crisis is really affecting all of us. So then sort of they came together and formed Sunrise, and yeah, basically now we're here. We've grown so much over the past like year and a half, especially since the Nancy Pelosi action, which is like, we basically took over her office, which I'm sure was in the video also, so you guys saw. But yeah. So basically, what's the problem? Our main problem is that climate change is happening, and we all know this, but we believe that it's really important to like sort of ground ourselves in the reality of what the situation really is like. So I'm just going to show you guys a quick video of my friend Ray, and this is basically just him telling a story about how the climate crisis has affected his life and why he's fighting for climate justice.
My name is Ray Norton. I'm 18 years old. This is how climate change and pollution has affected me. One of my most distinct memories growing up in Detroit.
Hold on, you need to get out of the slideshow.
My name is Ray Norton. I'm 18 years old. This is how climate change and pollution has affected me. One of my most distinct memories growing up in Detroit is going south on I-75. Smelling the pollution coming from Marathon and seeing the smoke and the fire on the freeway. I remember trying to hold my breath as long as I could, but eventually you have to breathe in. I've lived in Detroit my whole life. We bounced around a lot when I was a kid. We couldn't always afford to pay rent, and neither could a lot of my friends and family. I know that the planet is on a path towards destruction, and I know that it's caused by the same people who produce the smells and the smoke on the freeway. Poor people, minorities, and young people like me are facing violence and threats in our lives every day from a system that treats us like resources to be extracted.
So this is my old neighborhood. The wall that separates Detroit and Grosse Pointe over there was
was a big site for dumpers, like business owners usually would come, you would see them dumping their trash, their tires, or roof shingles. These houses are all built, 50, some of them even 100 years ago across the city, and all of them are built with the methods of, asbestos, lead. In our own house, we had lead paint chips, and whenever these houses get knocked down and burned down, the neighborhood is affected by that. We breathe that air in. I see these forces of oppression so clearly. I've come to realize, like a lot of young people, that is our economy. An economy ruled by profit. An economy that needs our environment to be disposable and needs people to be disposable. At the same time, I was seeing videos of young people across the country going to their elected officials and demanding action on the climate and pollution. I was arrested with other activists for sitting in at Nancy Pelosi's office and demanding a Green New Deal. Our generation is sick of a system that leaves us with no future and no hope for a better life. It's not you and me that has to change. It's the system that allows companies, shareholders, and billionaires to destroy our planet. The Sunrise Movement, to me, is about elevating young people to fight on the front lines of building a new, more just, more fair future. I've lived in pollution, in poverty, in climate change my whole life. As long as those things exist, I'll continue to struggle.
I'll make sure you stop it.
Oh, shoot. Cool. So, So going off of what Ray just said, I know you guys kind of have had your little touch on what Sunrise Movement is through the video that you saw, but Ray said what the Sunrise Movement means to him is a chance for like a livable future, a future that's more fair, more just, and where we all have an environment where we can all thrive. And that's kind of what the Sunrise Movement is all about. It's about kind of getting young people involved and elevating us to a position where our voices are heard by our elected officials. Because for the past, well, you guys know, for the past 100 years or whatever, this issue's really been avoided. I mean, if you guys heard Greta Thunberg's speech at the UN, maybe 3 weeks ago now, she called out our world leaders for not carrying out their word. She said that we don't want to believe that you guys are evil, but I mean, when the science has been so clear for 30 or so years from now, or in the past 30 years or so, and action not be taken, and now we're in a spot where we only have, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN-funded agency with scientists from around the globe. It's not some propped up fake propaganda machine like some conservative talking points like to say. Saying we only have 11 years to drastically alter every aspect of our economy and society to make sure that we have a livable future. And when we're saying 11 years, to be clear, it doesn't mean we have 11 years till the world just ends. That's not what that means. But it does mean that we only have 11 years before a number of tipping points kick in from around the globe, positive feedback loops, which would essentially just mean that the climate crisis continues to get worse and worse every year, exponentially. So we have 11 years to basically stop that from happening. Okay, so what are the side effects of a warming planet? I kind of just went on a little tangent, but as I'm sure most of you are aware, side effects of a warming planet. Obviously, global temperature increase will cause things like what we saw in California in the past few years, greater wildfires, greater droughts. It even means greater flooding in some areas because it affects parts of the globe differently. It means obviously the melting of the Arctic and Antarctic. It means permafrost melt in Russia, Alaska, etc., releasing even new diseases that we might not have encountered as mankind in the last few centuries because they've all been frozen under permafrost. There's a lot of things going into this that you might not think about. We hear about, okay, the polar bears are losing their ice and they're losing their homes and all the Arctic species will die out, but it's really in reality a lot bigger issue. It's an existential threat to humanity and the globe as a whole. Here at Sunrise, we believe that it is the #1 issue of our times, and we're living in a time where a very thin window where we can attempt to try and fix or mitigate the coming effects. So what are some of the other effects? Obviously, oceans rising. Here in Connecticut, especially along the shoreline, we're going to see a lot of those effects taking place. If the worst of climate change is allowed to happen, that means literally Florida's underwater. It means large parts of California's underwater, which seems like some crazy radical thing. But if you listen to the scientists and their predictions, that could happen if we don't get what needs to be done in the next 11 years. Increased drought and flooding, warmer summers, of course, a destabilized food supply, which is something that seems crazy to think about because we live in a system where like food is always available, water is always available here in the United States. But really, in the coming years, we could see our agricultural system start to fail simply because we're in a system that relies on like continuous imports, exports, et cetera, without that really changing. And once you throw in a number of unknown factors like how droughts are going to continuously affect our agriculture in the United States and abroad, how the fish populations are going to be affected by our rising acidity in our oceans, and simply just our overfishing, et cetera, it's going to have drastic effects. And simply from in the next few years alone, we're looking at if global average temperature increases by that 1.5 degrees Celsius that you guys hear about, which is what this 11 years is, if we reach that 1.5 degrees Celsius, that means for sure 100% of coral reefs around the globe will die. That'll have a drastic effect on how our fish populations and all our food supply from the ocean goes into effect around the globe. Like that will have drastic impacts that then carry down the line. Of course, affecting ecosystems abroad and the strength of natural disasters. We've been here in Connecticut, like we've been seeing an increase in hurricanes. We've seen Hurricane Maria, and I think we'll show some more of that in a second. Hurricane Maria and all these other hurricanes that are continually getting worse and worse. It's not saying that climate change is directly causing a hurricane, because they've obviously always existed, but it is making them stronger and bigger and more unprecedented than before. So of course, billion-dollar natural disasters like the wildfires we've seen in California. And as you can see from these headlines, things are kind of picking up. Hurricane Irma, icebergs the size of Antarctica, Delaware, that was not too long ago, broke off from Antarctica. Droughts getting worse and worse. Heat waves scorching across the United States. And people are dying because of the climate crisis. And that's only become worse and worse. And here's the wildfires in California that I mentioned, that I'm sure you all heard about, and I've seen the devastating effects, especially in like Paradise. Hurricane Maria, death toll will be more than almost 5,000 in Puerto Rico alone. And hurricanes are just getting stronger and stronger due to climate change. So we kind of wanted to give you guys a second to kind of reflect on maybe your biggest concerns about climate change amongst yourselves, or how you think it'll affect you, and then we'll kind of talk about maybe what you didn't think of. So if you guys want to take a minute or two, kind of discuss that, or amongst your peers.
I was actually interested in this. I live in Western Massachusetts, and where I live, if all of the ice caps melt, my house becomes beachfront property. So, I mean, I'm all in. But I think probably the biggest challenge that the United States faces is the sea level rise will affect the coastline, because we have one of the reasons I like the United States, for the United States success, is that we have like this line of barrier islands to the coast that shelter the coast from storms. And so if the sea level rises like 20 feet, those go underwater and the coast is left bare for storms and stuff. And I think even like a five drought, you might see like another dust bowl and food prices would skyrocket. How would climate change affect
better, but obviously Alright, a little bit more.
Just like 1 more minute.
It's interesting because like a lot of countries that benefit from like they mentioned Russia, Canada, even us with Alaska. When the ice caps recede, it uncovers a lot more resources. I think that's why Russia doesn't really care. All the time we are farming and putting up
But the good thing is, like, economic-wise, we get real money.
Alright guys, so we're gonna bring it back in, and we'd love to like hear your stories about how climate change, how you've seen it like in your own lives, and what you're afraid of losing. But first we'll just share a little bit from ourselves. So for me in particular, I live in Rhode Island, so it's the ocean state, and we were hit by Hurricane Sandy, and like seeing the destruction of that was probably the first time that I had like an encounter with such a massive like environmental like crisis. And then that's when I like sort of had the realization that like, whoa, this is like not normal, like this is really terrifying. And also my family is from Portugal, so we see like these wildfires that are happening every year over the summer, and they just keep getting progressively worse and worse. So that's pretty much how I've seen it in my own life.
So I grew up in Burlington, Connecticut. It's just like a pretty scenic town, like a lot of forests and all that type of stuff. Like we have a huge bear population and all that. So I've always like cared about the environment, always like been concerned, and always cared about like climate change and it was happening and all that. So I don't really have like an origin story into that. But I mean, one thing that like here in Connecticut, I know maybe a lot of you can relate to, maybe not. But we have the third highest energy prices in the United States. We have like 400,000 households every billing cycle that can't afford their energy bills and are continuously shut off. And like my mom, like growing up in a single mom like household with just me and my sister, like we struggled with bills and stuff like that. And that was something that like affected me and my family. And last year as a freshman, I had the opportunity to serve on the governor's transition committee on energy policy, and seeing the statistics of households that can't afford their energy bills and realizing like, wow, like that was me growing up was like a huge thing for me personally. And how that all factors into climate change and how it all factors into like our energy production and all of that really relates, because like energy efficiency is one major solution that we can wield to simply solve the climate crisis. Using less electricity, making sure that houses are insulated and well built and not losing all their heat right out the roof is really one major key that's not exactly so sexy as like solar panels and wind power and all that, but that's like one thing, and I'll talk about it maybe a little bit later, but that like Sunrise Connecticut's really pushing for the state of Connecticut to amp up. But besides that, like I have friends in like Alaska that I've luckily met through this like movement. And like just like I'm on the phone with them and like hearing them like cough because of wildfires in Anchorage is absolutely insane. Like I couldn't even like imagine, like they can't breathe because of wildfires happening and they can't be put out. And this is happening across the United States, this is happening across the globe. We're looking at these massive fires in the Amazon, burning down the lungs of the world. Like, this is only going to get worse. And sure, we might not have like forest fires hitting us right here in the state of Connecticut, but things like that are only going to get worse and worse. Like, we might not really ever see those wildfires in the state of Connecticut, but we will be feeling the effects of climate change in other ways. And it's kind of hard, like, thinking about it before you get involved in like a movement like this. Like, it's easy to kind of just sit back and be like, okay, like, that's happening way over there. Like, okay, fires in Brazil. It's easy to do that. But once you learn and start thinking about all of this and the effects, like, just think 10 years down the line, like, when all this keeps getting worse and worse, like, that will definitely affect everyone. And another side note is, like, if you're concerned, like, some conservatives are or whatever, about like immigration into the United States, et cetera, especially from like Mexico and down there, like that is only going to get worse. There's going to be a massive refugee crisis from across the globe, from these island nations, from all these other not as wealthy nations as the United States, that will not be able to simply sustain the effects of climate change. The climate change will create wars over resources that we haven't thought about before. We're talking about just water and food. That's like back to like the Middle Ages. There's going to be wars like that once again, because simply our economies won't be able to buffer the effects of climate change as easily as we may hope. And so if we want to have some of you guys share maybe some of your concerns or thoughts or whatever you guys talked about, could be anything at all.
Okay, yeah. So like, I'm from Lima, Peru. So like, in our case, 2 years ago we had this big flooding and landslide. White Peru would be landslide, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, yeah, I think it was the first time I've seen it more shocking, because it's just affect we just are not prepared for any kind of emergency or natural disaster, for anything at all. So it just affects a lot of people, and especially people living in near the rivers, that just lost everything they had. And the plan the government had was just not efficient until now. Like, there's still people that haven't had like any kind of reparation after that are still having has increased the housing prices in the country, and especially like in the most vulnerable places. And definitely, like, when all of these, when it gets worse, it will definitely be worse for them. And that's, I think, like the most thing that afraids, especially back in Peru, that we're not prepared for any of the changes that are gonna come. And like, the way to attend more of these crises is more like turning off fires. Like, first of all, we're not having talks that much, like a big talk on climate change, but it's more focused, or trying to be focused on like solving and overcoming poverty and the housing crisis. But they're still doing it wrong. But they just are not thinking. We're not thinking of climate change.
Yeah. So just a key point, like, coming off of that, like, that is one reason why a lot of countries like aren't taking action, is because there's a lot of issues happening. There's a lot of issues. There's poverty, mass poverty. There's the need for just like industrialization. Like, developing countries like need that, they're working on that at their own pace, and that's a huge part of kind of climate change. Is that, like, the United States, as well as a lot of other Western nations, had a chance to develop using fossil fuels cheaply and easily, and not really have to deal with consequences until now. And now around the globe, we have a lot of countries just undergoing those processes that the United States was lucky enough to go through. And now it's kind of like a controversial thing, because now the United States and the rest of the Western globe and like the UN, et cetera, is like, look, you guys developed sustainably. It's like, well, you didn't. So that's like one major just political aspect of what's happening. But that is a huge part of what we're talking about, is the need for sustainable development, because it can be done, and it can be done right. And if it is done right, in reality, like, even disregarding like climate change, pretend it's not happening for just a second, like, wouldn't having free energy from like solar power, wind power, hydropower, et cetera, just be like good? Like, the United States talks about needing energy independence, and that's why we like open up oil in the United States and drilling and all that, so that we can provide for ourselves. Like, just disregarding everything, like climate change, like, isn't that just a good thing? And that's kind of like my argument to anyone that doesn't believe in climate change. It's like, why wouldn't we want to do this? Like, in the end, it's going to be a good thing for everyone anyways. Any solutions to climate change is just a good thing if this wasn't even happening.
Did you
Hi, yeah, I'm also from New York, and I have definitely noticed how our summers are way more hotter and our winters way more colder. And the worst thing is that in Lima, especially, we have a hole in the ozone layer. So it's like, it's getting really, really dangerous just to go out in the sun because people can get cancer from it. And also, yeah, what she talked about, the floods that we had 3 years ago, and that we didn't have like a case like that maybe in like 20 years, where like hundreds and thousands of people lost their homes, not only their homes, like literally everything.
So for me, something that really worries me about climate change is like the thought that the generations after us won't have like the life that we got to live, and also that I'm just worried this might, like, I don't just feel for myself, but I think like everybody has that they're just scared that they won't be able to live like their life fully, that it's just gonna end not because like we die naturally, but because of climate change.
Exactly. And that's a huge worry. And climate change, it doesn't mean that you'll die in like a forest fire, but even if we look at like the fossil fuel industry or something, the state of Connecticut just a few months ago released a report, and we have one of the worst asthma rates in the country. And that is largely because of the particulate matter in the air from the fossil fuel industry. And just like transportation, and car exhaust, et cetera. Like just talking about asthma rates and stuff like that, you might not automatically be like, oh, that's a climate change issue.